Thank you, Nitin, and good evening to all of you. Very pleased to have this opportunity to welcome you and to open this important session. My name is Masamba Choi. I'm the project executive of the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub, an initiative of the UNFCCC Secretariat launched 3 years ago at Glasgow. So we are a quite young movement with a one-fold vision, how innovation can be leveraged to contribute to providing flourishing life to the many people while keeping human activities within planetary boundaries. I think that point is really important because it differentiates the approach that we are having to innovation from, let's say, the mainstream approach. We are not focusing at the sectoral level, at the industry level, to see how we can improve what is happening in the process of production. I'm not saying that this has not to be done. It has to be done. But our focus is more on how innovation can be used to satisfy the needs of the many people, but doing it in a way that is aligned with the climate and sustainability goal. Now, this is a very challenging, a very complex undertaking, because satisfying the needs of the many people while keeping the planet healthy is not something easy. It's about reinventing our industry, reinventing our economy, our societies, and reinventing ourselves. So can policies and science contribute in facilitating this transition? Yes, they can, but there are conditions. They have to serve innovation. Without innovation, we can achieve none of this goal. Of course, policies are important, but as we very often say, we did not shift from horse to car by taxing the horses. Policies are important, but if you do not innovate, we need to have the societal shift that are supported by innovation to transition our societies. So policies are important, but they have to be integrated with innovative technology, innovative financial instrument, innovative business model, innovative cooperative approach so that they can contribute to effective response to the challenge of climate and sustainability. Can science support the transition to sustainability? Yes, but it has to be also, let's say, science that is purposeful. The problem that we are facing with innovation is most of the time it is done in an ad hoc manner, randomly. We innovate and then we look for use cases. Again, this has to be done, but we need to be mindful that the challenge of climate and sustainability will not be fully addressed by operating product-to-push innovation. What we see also most often is what I will call reactive innovation. We innovate to solve a problem. There is a problem, and then we have to innovate to solve it, like the COVID vaccine. This also needs to be done, but again, we need to be mindful that this will not be enough to address the challenge of climate and sustainability. What we are promoting is a vision-driven approach to innovation, where we paint the future that we would like to build, and we backcast from that future. This is only if we have this approach that we can align the needs, innovation, and science. We need to start from the features that we would like to build and turn it into concrete climate and sustainability innovation that are needed. And then the first point is to see whether the innovative solution exists but need to be deployed at scale. If the response is yes, we have the technology, but we need to deploy them at scale, then we can figure out what are the innovative policies, the innovative financial instrument, the innovative business model, the innovative fiscal instrument that need to be integrated with the innovative technology for upscaling. If the innovative technology is missing, then it has to be developed. And when it has to be developed, we need to check whether we have the science behind. Do we have the applied science? Do we have the fundamental science that is required? And this is only when science brings the foundational knowledge that is required to develop the missing innovation that will serve specific needs in terms of climate and sustainability. This is only if we have this integrated approach where the innovation that need to be deployed, the innovation that need to be developed, the applied science that is needed, and the foundational science that is needed, if all these things are aligned and integrated, then science will serve the many people and the planet. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Masamba. I would like to invite now Stephan Kuster, who's the head of external affairs from Frontiers, to introduce the panel and start the moderation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Masamba, for that introduction. I would actually like to invite the panelists to join me here in the panel so that we can go straight into the discussion. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephan Kuster, and I'm the head of external affairs of Frontiers, the open access scientific publisher. I would like to thank the UNFCCC and UGIH, and especially Masamba, for being a fantastic partner for this last year. We met in Dubai, we signed a cooperation agreement, and we feel extremely welcomed again in your pavilion here in Baku. None of us would be here if we didn't think climate change is more than an important problem, that it needs addressing and it needs solving. Of that I am convinced. I am also fairly convinced that most of us, if not all of us, share the opinion that science plays a role in addressing those challenges presented by climate change, that any solution and any description of the problem has to go through science. However, every year around this time, a gap crystallizes between the available evidence and the available solutions already on the table through innovation and policy action and decisions taken through processes like the COP process. So this is why we're having this discussion today, to address some of the possible causes and explore some of the possible causes for that gap between science and innovation and the uptake that leads to climate action that has a real impact. For this discussion, I am extremely honored to present a very impressive panel today. Professor Phoebe Koundouri is director of the Research Laboratory on Socioeconomic and Environmental Sustainability and professor for climate and energy policy at the Technical University of Denmark. She's a member of the selection committee of the Nobel Prize in Economics and also chief editor of Frontiers in Environmental Economics. Dr. Jason Rohr, who joins us online today, is the Gala Professor and Chair of the Department of Biological Sciences at Notre Dame University in the United States. His research focuses on ecology and public health, and in particular the impact of pollution and climate change on wildlife and human health. And he is this year's recipient of the Frontiers Planet Prize. Dr. Salvatore Arico is the CEO of the International Science Council. He has 30 years of international scientific experience, including as head of ocean science at the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Secretary-General Scientific Advisory Board, Senior Visiting Research Fellow at the United Nations University, and Chief of Program at the Convention on Biological Diversity. To my right, Dr. Marcelo Mena is the former Minister of the Environment of Chile. He holds a PhD in environmental engineering from the University of Iowa, and he is the CEO of the Global Methane Hub, which also has a pavilion here at COP29. So, as much as I love having you here on this panel, I would actually prefer to have you a few halls further down at this venue, sitting at the table of the official delegations, negotiating what is going to come out or not come out as concrete solutions and results of this COP. As we mentioned in the introduction, there is this gap between innovation and science. And I would like to start with Jason online as a researcher. How do you experience that disconnect? Is there a disconnect from your perspective? And what role can you play as a scientist in this kind of table and discussion?
Thank you, Stephan, and I'm privileged and honored to be on the panel. Thank you for the invitation, and sorry that I couldn't be there in person. I do believe that there is a disconnect between science and policy. I think part of it is a product of a decline in trust of science and the institutions across countries on our planet. So I think we need to build trust and return the trust that we've had historically in science. I think science has to guide us towards the right decisions and policies. It needs to inform, but it needs to work closely with policymakers, obviously. And we have had a decline in trust in both institutions, in our governments and science, and I think we need to move to improve that trust. Happy to comment on ways that we may be able to do that, but I figured I would potentially turn it over to some of my colleagues at this point and have it go back to you, Stephan.
Thank you, Jason. Indeed, let me hand that question over to you, Phoebe. You've been on both sides of that divide, right? So how does it look from those two perspectives?
Okay, first of all, science is crucially needed in this transition because it's a difficult transition. It's a data hectic and science hectic transition. The scientific analysis that needs to support this transition, not only the climate towards neutrality and resilience, but all other systems that are relevant to sustainability transition as articulated in the SDGs, are very hectic in terms of the science content. It needs a lot of data to support the scientific analysis and a lot of technological innovation to support the solutions. So we know for a fact that we need science. The other part of the equation is the rest of the stakeholders. So the politicians, the policymakers, the businesses, the financial institutions, the civil society. What we need there is to create an interface between all these layers of interdisciplinary science with the different layers of the stakeholders. We need to put the different stakeholders around the same table and make sure that they understand the problem, they understand that solutions exist, and they are part of the co-design of the solution pathways, not just as advisors and bringing their local wisdom, but also as shareholders. They need to deeply engage and know the solution pathways. And to do this, you need hubs where you co-design. At UNSDSN, I chair the Climate Hub of UNSDSN, that is a big network across the globe of 2,000 institutions, and we have a hub in each and every country where the different layers of stakeholders are engaged in co-design solutions. This is, of course, expensive. It needs a lot of research and also government and also private money so that everybody is engaged. But we need to understand that the other stakeholders do not understand the science. They don't have to. It's not their job. But we definitely need an interface between science and the other people for understanding and for creating the capacity for implementation. And the capacity for implementation really means a serious wave of investment so that the other stakeholders have the skills and knowledge to really engage in the transformation.
I would love to come back to this issue of building a local context for science that by definition is a global endeavor, right? But how to localize it. I'll come back to that. But first I wanted to ask Marcelo, you were minister for 4 years, so you were firmly on the policy side. How did you use science? What was the role of science and scientific advice in your tenure?
My successor, also Maisa Rojas, is also IPCC author. She's currently the minister, and it makes a difference. And I do think because you speak with, when you defend positions, you from specialty, and nobody would think it would be reasonable for having a non-economist be a minister of finance. So why would it be reasonable for a non-specialist to be minister of the environment? Because you need to have solutions and implement. So I think that does make a difference. And a lot of the things that I was able to do was actually from my research. For example, I had worked on using models to estimate the externalities of air pollution. And then when I was in office, I was able to establish carbon taxes and pollution taxes associated to the same models, or using a forecast system that was able to predict the accumulation of air pollution and help manage air quality and prevent bad air days. So that was very important. But when I see this also in the context of the UNFCCC, the moment that we started putting science forward, it was a moment in which we left ambiguity at the door, in the sense that climate commitments are either 1.5 aligned or not. And I remember this when I was worried about Chile not continuing with an NDC that would be 1.5 aligned. And when the moment I hear the Minister of Finance say, we are going to do a 1.5 aligned target because that's what the science says, I thought, well, we're in good shape because there's objective data you could use to drive this. So this new agenda that I'm leading with the climate, the methane agenda, is also very science-oriented. We either reduce short-lived species or we will not reach 1.5 because it's the fastest way to reduce temperature in the short term. This is not a substitute of decarbonization. It's something that is linked to decarbonization too. And therefore, to implement the solutions, many of which are not necessarily available, we need to have research and development to be able to establish and open up the opportunities. Because when we're talking about methane, we need to crack today only 2% of mitigation in the livestock sector is cost effective. And that's why we deployed almost $100 million already in research development funding for lowering livestock emissions, and the same goes with other issues that are emerging, like waste management or rice production. So sort of like, we spent billions of dollars on clean energy, on e-mobility, but we've spent much smaller fraction on what is nearly half of the problem, which is the methane and non-CO2 pollutants.
Can I say something?
Sure.
You know why? I am part of the Academia Europaea, is the prestigious academy of Europe. And we've thought about this a lot. And I think that the 1.5 got so connected with CO2 and was so successful in going across all the stakeholders that fortunately we undermined all other things that are important, methane and adaptation in a way. So if we could find narratives as strong and as laconic as the CO2 and connect it to the 1.5, we might be able to push forward on that angles as well.
Just one response. So for that same reason, we support wood burning today. If we include wood burning, and I was proud to have banned wood burning in Santiago, it's a climate solution for most of the people that probably attend this conference. But when you incorporate the black carbon and the methane, it's probably one of the worst things you could do for climate and air. So this is the lack of link we have. The diesel scandal, promoting it a climate solution, unacceptable at this stage, and we lost so much time. So I think it's really important that we not only bring climate science, but also the full science, air pollution science too.
Okay, I want to bring in Salvatore here because I guess that's step one is policies referring to the science. That's great. Science having narratives that makes, that resonate and making sure that these narratives are not just focused, as you said, on one thing. But Salvatore, you and the ISC, you have been working on the issue of trust in science. So now we get into some of the causes of this gap. How that step 1 and 2, having the narrative and referring to science from the policy side, how does that help the uptake and the response by civilian populations, by society of those measures?
Thank you. I'll try to connect my intervention to some of the things that have been said. So the ISC federates the academies and the international unions, the national academies of the whole world. And our motto is science as a public global good, and as a global public good. And in that context, it's not really science per se, but it's more the knowledge that is acquired through science, including through co-design of the research agenda and the co-production knowledge through dialogues between scientists and other stakeholders. So I would say that from the point of view of what Stephan just asked me, which was mentioned, by the way, by Jason, so trust in science. We recently conducted an expert workshop on trust in science with the JRC, the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, and the preliminary conclusions are that actually science is still relatively trusted, and the problem we are facing is more in terms of horizontal mistrust in institutions, and Jason used the word institution when referring to science. We have to recognize that science is perceived often as an elite, as in institutions. So how do you break that barrier? How do you make science reach out to society? I think there are two efforts to be conducted. One is to convince scientists that by engaging, by getting their hands wet, they are not compromising the integrity of science. They are just making science more relevant. It's not because scientists are asked to generate actionable knowledge that basic sciences are being threatened, because we know that when it comes to science, you never know where your nose will take you. It's a gradient, it's a continuum that goes from basic all the way to applications. And the other big effort is in relation to open science. And open science means that if indeed we agree that science is a global public good, you need to invest into open science. And open science, of course, requires infrastructures, it requires sometimes certain business models. I mentioned that the members of the ISC, 250 science organizations, several of those members, including academies of sciences, they are publishers or they have deals with publishers, because at the end of the day, for science to be open, you need to rely on some infrastructures. It entails some costs. It also entails revisiting some of the basic rules of the game. For example, without mentioning specific names, recently there was a polemics about the fact that one publisher actually sold to a company involved in AI the data generated through science. How do you address those questions? So we need to talk about how to operationalize, how to walk the talk on the notion of open science. And the UNESCO Declaration on Open Science is just the beginning of the work before us.
Thank you, Salvatore. So back to Jason. As a recipient of the Frontiers Planner Prize, your work was first put forward by your university, selected by your university, Notre Dame. Then it was shortlisted by the National Academy of Sciences in the US, and then finally selected by a jury of 100 climate scientists for the award. So there was an extensive selection process, and it can surely be said that it has been identified as transformative and actionable research. So what is the next step? What do you need to make your research, to take your research from the field to, let's say, really that context that Phoebe was referring to, expose it to the stakeholders that can action it?
Yeah, do I have time to briefly tell people about the work to give them a little context, Stephan?
Yeah, sure, briefly.
Great. So we study schistosomiasis, which is a neglected tropical disease that's quite prevalent in Africa. It is a worm that's transmitted from snails to humans when they enter freshwater bodies, and it's the second most devastating parasitic disease in the world behind malaria. We showed that communities that have more agriculture around them have more fertilizer entering the water bodies. They have more submerged invasive vegetation, which is the habitat for the snails. More snails, more schisto, and more infections. So what we did is we physically removed the submerged aquatic habitat in half of the villages that we worked in, and we showed that it significantly reduced reinfection rates in the school children. So we were addressing a really important health problem and using that as a lever. But we didn't stop there. We wanted to convert this nuisance vegetation into a private good to improve these people's lives. So we converted it to compost, showed that it increased crop production, and the benefits were 9 times the costs. We also tested it as a livestock feed, and it maintained the weight of the livestock that we tested up to 60% substitution, but was up to 179 times cheaper than traditional livestock feed. And finally, to address climate change, we combined it with cow manure in biodigesters that produce both fertilizer as well as gas that can be used for cooking or fuel for generators for electricity production. So we're combating methane release associated with the cow patties, and we're reducing deforestation associated with using wood for cooking purposes by providing these communities with cooking gas. And now we're in the process of scaling this. We have remote sensing technology that can identify where this vegetation is in the landscape so we can target the innovation where it's needed the most. And so we're working with the Ministry of Health, agricultural organizations in Senegal and Western Africa where we work. We're scaling now to East Africa. We have work in Kenya. So we have great partnerships. It's community-based research, community-based participatory research, as Phoebe mentioned, so we work very closely with these communities as well as the governments. We're also collaborating with corporations. So one of our innovation strategies is to educate these communities on the benefits of this innovation, to see whether they will voluntarily remove the vegetation on their own. Another scaling approach is to partner with civil engineering companies in the area. Civil engineering companies have equipment that can be used to mechanically remove the vegetation, and this equipment is not in use, 24 hours, 7 days a week. So we're starting a partnership with civil engineering companies that can use the equipment as a second profit stream to remove the vegetation and convert it into compost, livestock feed, or cooking gas, and at the same time provide these communities with a public health benefit. And also we can use our remote sensing technology and train them to use it so that way they only return to these water bodies when it's profitable to do so, when the vegetation has regrown, and when the vegetation is dangerous to these communities, that is, when it increases schistosomiasis infection. So we have several scaling approaches. We're working with the government in West Africa, and right now it's looking quite promising.
I mean, that sounds amazing. That sounds like you managed to create exactly that environment and context that that Phoebe was talking about. Salvatore, I see that you wanted to react to Jason.
I just wanted to make a comment on what Jason presented and to commend his work, because I think this is not just science in action, but also transdisciplinary science in action. Because I'm sure that those very science questions, research questions that Jason's project asked itself, which led to the paper that was selected and received the Planet Prize, those very questions reflected the co-design, that is to say, not just the aspirations and expectations of multiple stakeholders. I'm sure those stakeholders were at the table with scientists co-designing the questions and co-producing the knowledge. And I think that's a beautiful illustration of how you bridge gaps, because we are here at COP29 with negotiations on a global issue that require, obviously, all of us to agree on those global targets, but the solutions will be at multiple scales, starting with the local scale. And I think that's a very good illustration of how knowledge, scientific knowledge in action can make a difference. Thank you.
Wonderful. Phoebe, please.
And I wanted, if I manage to open my microphone, I wanted to emphasize that the challenge is not just the interaction between the researchers and the other stakeholders, the science and the other stakeholders, it's also between the sciences. We have great difficulty escaping from the silos of the disciplines. And through that difficulty, we are losing all other stakeholders. Because if you're only working in the silo of your discipline, then the questions that you are researching and your tools are not relevant to the real world. And the stakeholders understand this immediately, if you are relevant or not. So we need to put a serious effort on interdisciplinary work, which means reshaping not just through project-based collaborations, but reshaping the structure of universities and research institutions in order to allow for true interdisciplinarity to flourish. In the Global Climate Hub that I am chairing, we do research on energy systems, on land use systems, on climate systems, on mobility systems, on health systems, socioeconomic systems. It's only possible to produce an integrated, world-relevant solution at different scales only through collaboration between the scientists.
So one condition that can support interdisciplinarity, but also the circulation of knowledge from academia to industry and society, is what Salvatore was pointing to, is open science, right? The fact access to science outside of academia is crucial. how crucial is access to science in the Global Methane Hub?
Well, so the enteric fermentation accelerator, which we launched last COP, which has delivered over $100 million in research to major groups working on improved genomics for selecting animals that have lower methane, better feed additives. We're actually putting together all the people that are working on methane vaccines in one room and actually have a coherent strategy is very important. But everything we do is a global public good. We have investors, for example, Danone and others from the private sector, but they understand that this is going to be a global public good because we need to reduce the cost of methane mitigation overall for the whole sector. So this is very important. We'll continue to do this with the research on rice because we have many challenges. Rice has higher production. These emissions are expected to double in the short term, but also water scarcity is bringing a new challenge to the production. So we need to start looking into aerobic rice for the first time and actually use less water and provide a win-win. That transparency is also very important. This next Saturday, we are in Science Day. We are launching the data for the first time, the data reveal for Environmental Defense Fund's satellite MethaneSat and Carbon Mapper's satellite Tanager-1, which are two public access satellites. Today, you had to purchase the data. And frankly, an oil and gas company could buy the data for it never to be seen in terms of the methane leaks. And this is a new era of transparency and accountability. And we are also, for it to be open access, it needs to be accessible. We, of course, are creating platforms in which communities could look at the benzene exposure that they're having, the methane exposure, and so they were able to call on the local authorities also to take action, independently whether the national governments care about the topic or not.
That's great. And actually, it's a good segue to the closing round because we slowly have to get to the closing round, and this is the round where we get to make recommendations for how, in particular, the COP process can help bridge that gap, right? And I'll go first. I'll take my prerogative as moderator. For those of you in the room, on my left, there is a banner, and it says Open Science Charter on it. And this is our call and our contribution to the leaders and delegations meeting here at COP. One thing that governments can agree on, because it's already been done in many, many places, it's not controversial, it's not expensive, it's not political, is the publicly funded research. Let's start just with that, with the publicly funded research should be accessible to the public. And a mandate, an agreement among governments to mandate that the science that is funded by the governments should be published in open access, the data should be shared in open science, etc. That would be one tangible outcome that would really make a difference. So I'm now going to go through the panel. What is your recommendation addressed to COP of how to bridge the gap between science and action? I'll start with Marcelo on my right.
I think support this in the context of transparency. So many of the things that are going to be the anchor for change is transparency. When I was in government, I was a champion of transparency, and I had learned from what things like the American Lung Association's reports were, in terms of transparency of data access. We saw what the data access of the Beijing PM 2.5 measurement and how that caused the government of China to shift, from one tweet that said this is crazy bad air, this turned into a whole network and 40% less pollution for PM 2.5. And so we in Chile led the Escazú Agreement, which is the first human rights environment agreement, which has 3 principles: participation, so people could access on environmental impact assessments, etc., environmental justice, but transparency. Because once the data is out there, you need to act on it, and you provide powerful tools for communities to continue to push governments, even though they might not think it's an important thing. So I think this is a really transformational issue. The access to information is a transformational environmental initiative.
Phoebe.
Phoebe, my turn. So open science is crucial. Open data is crucial. Transparency is crucial. But the other crucial element is capacity to use all this. Openness means it is accessible and available, but the ability of ministries or businesses, of financial institutions, of the civil society to really have access is very, very limited. And I know that because we work on the ground as well. So in these living hubs that we organize, I have to tell you that it takes about 2 years for the different stakeholders to agree where they are today, let alone building the pathways forward. So we need in our schools and universities and vocational training to really invest, like we invest in green technologies and digital technologies, to invest in the capacity of the other stakeholders to engage. And when there is real capacity, then the COP will not only be using IPCC results, will not only be using the scientists that consult governments, but will be using the actual stakeholder fora that will be at different scales, at least it should be using those, that function at different scales, from local to city to regional to national to international, in order to bring in all this wisdom. We need to position ourselves in a clever way across different scales and across different stakeholders in order to bring in all the wisdom. And on a final note, let me emphasize the need for social science as well, not to be left outside the room. Natural sciences are important, engineering is important, but what is more basic than the science that analyzes human behavior? Without the demand side, irrespective of how efficient and cost-efficient and result and impact-driven is our technology, without the demand side of using that technology and reducing behavior that is unsustainable, we are not going to make it. So invest on the social sciences as well.
Completely agree. Salvatore.
Yeah, very, very quickly. Yesterday, at an event that the IC helped organize, the chair of the scientific committee of the Global Climate Observing System expressed shared with the participants his amazement at the fact that the knowledge that we have on climate change and the climate system more generally, including climate change, evolves all the time, and we as scientists, we are obliged to reopen that very knowledge. And that's basically one of the main principles of science. And I think, to answer your provocative question, when it comes to adaptation, the best way that we can adapt is for the COP to utilize and adapt to that evolving knowledge that the scientific community in the first place, but not just the scientific community, because knowledge is to be found in all segments of society, generates and is able to put together. And we know that knowledge is dynamic, but at the same time, use it and adapt to it, because by evolving, that knowledge improves the level of, if you like, accuracy that piece of knowledge carries, and therefore impact in terms of identifying solutions. And I think we are starting to see some approaches to that. For example, the IPCC, which we know supports the COP process, now also works with grey literature, or is trying to reduce the gap between the moment in which that knowledge is published and the assessment process, which takes years. So that would be my message to the COP. Use that knowledge, adapt to the evolving nature of that knowledge, and support open access to that knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Salvatore. And it's very fitting that the last word belongs to Jason, to science. So, Jason, what's your wish for the COP process?
I want to first say that I agree with everything that the panelists said, so well done there. I think one thing we have to think about is the way that we communicate the issue. I mentioned trust initially. I think there is been a little bit of a decline in trust in science, and the public is concerned about the possibility that we might not have all of our predictions, perfectly correct, and it's almost certainly the case. They're not perfectly correct. So one question I often hear is, what if we shift to renewable energy, we reduce our meat consumption, we reduce cars and an increase public transportation, we restore biodiversity in natural areas, we genuinely make this great and just climate transition, and the science is wrong? Well, first, I don't think it's wrong, right? But these are the outcomes, I believe, if the science predictions are off. We have cleaner air and water, healthier children and people, less traffic and congestion, and thus more time with our family and friends. We have more livable cities. We have fewer extreme weather events and associated deaths. We have millions of green jobs. We have energy independence. We have less garbage. We have more opportunities for recreation in natural areas. We have greater wealth equity. And perhaps most importantly, we have the confidence that we're not leaving a crisis for our children. I often ask folks, are these such terrible outcomes if the science predictions are off? I think that's obviously a rhetorical question, but the point being that the way we communicate this issue and the risks and rewards, I think, is critical. Yes, the great and just climate transition is undoubtedly scary, but in my opinion, the risks seem relatively low and the rewards seem relatively high. I think that needs to be a major emphasis in COP and globally in how we communicate this issue.
Great last word, Jason. Thank you very much. And with that, I would like to thank the entire panel, Marcelo, Phoebe, Salvatore, Jason. I would like to thank the audience in the room and those online. If you'd like to support the Open Science Charter, there's a QR code on that banner that you can add your name to. We are collecting signatures to support this initiative. Big thank you to UNFCCC, to Masamba, to UGIH for hosting us here. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.